Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I'm your host, and I am very glad you've joined us. We have a pretty significant task ahead of us today.
We do.
We're going to open the book of the Bible that, well, most of us probably think we know the best. It's the book you turn to when you're heartbroken or, when you need a quick verse for a greeting card. But today, we're going to dismantle it, look at the engine, and then put it all back together.
We are talking about the Psalter.
We are.
It's the hymnal of the church, of course, but it's also one of the most intricate pieces of literature in human history. It's good to be here to discuss it.
To guide us through this analysis, we're relying on a heavyweight source. We are breaking down the introduction to the Psalms from the New Bible Dictionary, 3rd edition, specifically the scholarship of D.R.W. Wood and Howard Marshall.
It's solid. It's conservative, yet it's still critical scholarship. So, yeah, it's a reliable place to start.
Our mission for this deep dive is specific. We're not just reading poetry today. We really want to understand how this book was formed over centuries. We want to decode all that technical fine print that, let's be honest, everyone usually skips.
Oh, absolutely.
And we want to get to the theological core. We're looking at this as the historical hymn book of God's people, and all through a Reformed lens.
Which means we're looking for the covenant. We're looking for that redemptive thread that runs from the first page all the way to the last.
So let's get started. The source material begins with a claim that I think really sets the stage for everything else. It calls the Psalter a mirror.
A mirror of the soul. It's a classic description, but one we should take very seriously.
It is. But the source argues it mirrors every aspect of religious piety. And I think sometimes in the modern church, we have a habit of cherry-picking the encouragement.
Oh, for sure.
We want the verses that make us feel safe. But Wood and Marshall point out that this mirror reflects the dark nights of the soul just as much as the mountaintops.
Exactly. It reflects sorrow for sin. It reflects that terrifying experience of walking in darkness where God just feels absent.
And that's where the Psalms are so distinct from a lot of other religious literature. They're just so honest.
They are honest. But notice the balance. It's not just, venting emotion. It's emotion that's been processed through the lamp of faith. It's the grind of obedience to the law, the struggle for perfection, and the humility of submitting to the chastening rod.
That phrase, chastening rod, really stands out to me.
It's powerful.
It implies that the difficult things happening to the psalmist are not just bad luck. They're seen as part of God's parenting or God's discipline.
Precisely. The Hebrew poets took those raw, gritty experiences, pain, fear, guilt, and they turned them into themes for songs. They actually sang about the rod that corrected them.
Which brings us to the first interesting fact about the name. In Hebrew, the title for the book is Tehillim.
Yes, Tehillim.
Which translates to songs of praise. Now, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Okay.
If I open the Psalms, I see a lot of complaining. I see laments. I see crying out for help. So why is the overarching title praise when so much of the content is pain?
That is the paradox of Israel's faith. And the source explains this beautifully. Even the lament is a form of praise because it's directed toward God. It assumes God is there, that he hears, and that he can act. So the lament itself is an act of trust. And the expectation is always that God will act, and that action will result in praise.
So the destination is praise, even if the starting point is the pit.
That's right. And the source brings in C.S. Lewis here from his 1958 work, Reflections on the Psalms. Lewis makes a vital distinction that prevents us from reading this book incorrectly.
What's that?
He reminds us that these are poems, they're meant to be sung, they're not doctrinal treatises like, say, the Book of Romans, and they're not sermons like the Book of Hebrews.
Meaning we shouldn't try to parse every line for systematic theology in the same way we would a Pauline epistle.
You have to read them as lyric poetry. They use hyperbole. They use imagery. They express the religion of Israel from the inside out.
Okay.
And because the psalmists were heirs to a shared tradition, they weren't just writing private diary entries. They were writing for the community.
That is a key point. This was not David just journaling for himself in a cave somewhere.
No. Not at all. He was giving expression to the shared faith of the covenant people. And because of that, the Psalms belonged to all believers. They were the property of the Jew, and now, through Christ, they're the property of the Gentile. It's a universal liturgy.
Okay, let's talk about how we got this collection. I grew up hearing that the Psalms were the hymn book of the Second Temple, basically the songs the Jews sang after they came back from Babylon.
That's the common academic designation, yes.
But our source seems to think that's a bit reductive, or at least potentially misleading.
It is misleading if you take it to mean the songs were written then. The collection might have been finalized for the Second Temple, but the material itself is ancient. The source is very firm on this. Psalmody did not just appear out of nowhere in the 5th century BC.
You trace it all the way back to the Exodus.
All the way back. Exodus 15, the Song of Moses, that's a psalm. You have the Song of Deborah in Judges 5. You have Hannah's prayer in 1 Samuel 2. The source argues that the psalm, as a literary form, was part of Israel's DNA from the very beginning.
And not just Israel's DNA. This is the part of the deep dive that really surprised me. The source brings in the Raz Shamra tablets.
The Ugaritic texts. This is fascinating.
It is.
We have archaeological evidence that the citizens of Ugarit and the Babylonians were writing poetry with very, very similar structures. The rhythm, the parallelism, this was a standard cultural vessel in the ancient Near East.
So when God decided to give his people a hymn book, he didn't invent a brand new, alien style of music.
Yeah.
He used the pop culture or the high culture form that already existed.
You're right. He used a vessel they recognized. The form was common to the culture. The content was distinct revelation. It's a great reminder that God speaks to us in ways we can understand within our own cultural context.
So we have this ancient form spanning centuries. But who held the pen? The authorship debate? This is where the rubber meets the road for biblical authority. We have the list. David is attributed with 73 psalms. Asaph has 50. You've got the sons of Korah, Solomon, Heman, Ethan. Moses even gets one.
Psalm 90, a great one.
But the source highlights a major controversy here. Modern critical scholarship often denies Davidic authorship. They look at the David of the history books, the warlords, the general, the man of blood, and they say, this guy could not have written the sensitive, delicate poetry of Psalm 23.
Which, if you think about it, is a really shallow argument. It assumes a soldier can't be a poet. It just ignores the reality of human nature. General Patton wrote poetry. It's not mutually exclusive.
But the source goes deeper than just psychoanalyzing David. It looks at the text.
Right. We have to look at the historical record.
Yeah.
1 Samuel 16 explicitly describes David as a skilled musician.
Okay.
2 Samuel 1 shows him composing a high-level lament for Saul and Jonathan. And the source points to Amos 6.5.
Remind us what that says.
Well, Amos, writing centuries later, references the musical instruments of David. This proves that the tradition of David as the founder of Israel's sacred music was not some later invention. It was an established historical fact in the minds of the Israelites.
And for us, coming from a Reformed perspective, we have an even bigger witness.
The New Testament. This is crucial.
Yeah.
Jesus and the apostles build theological arguments on the fact that David wrote these psalms. In Mark 12, Jesus quotes Psalm 110 and says, David himself said by the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
If David didn't write it, Jesus' whole argument collapses.
So we can't just wave away those little titles at the top of the Psalms as, editorial mistakes.
No. We treat the superscriptions as historically reliable.
So we have the authors. Now let's look at the architecture. The Psalter isn't just a random shuffle of songs. It's organized.
It is. Divided into 5 books.
And the source suggests this was not an accident. Why 5?
The prevailing theory is that it mimics the Torah, the Pentateuch.
Oh, interesting.
Moses gave 5 books of law to the people. So, David, represented as the sweet psalmist of Israel, provides 5 books of response to that law.
The law and the praise. That structure really helps you see the intent behind the editing.
It does, and you can see the divisions clearly if you look for the doxologies. At the end of Psalm 41, 72, 89, and 106, there's a formal closing statement of praise.
Okay.
And then Psalm 150 functions as the doxology for the entire collection. It's a beautiful structure.
There's also a strange pattern with the names of God that the source mentions. This is something I never noticed until I read this breakdown.
The Elitistic Psalter.
Right. In Book 1, the name Yahweh the Lord is dominant. But then you hit Books 2 and 3, specifically Psalms 42 through 83, and suddenly it switches. Everyone is saying Elohim, God.
It's a very stark statistical shift. What this tells us is that the Psalter was likely compiled from smaller pre-existing collections.
Ah, so like smaller EPs that were collected into a big album.
That's a great way to put it. Someone gathered the Yahweh songs, someone gathered the Elohim songs, and eventually an editor stitched them together into the masterpiece we have today.
It makes you realize the providence of God in the editing process, not just the writing process.
That is a very reformed way to look at it. Inspiration covers the compilation as well.
I want to move to what I think is the most intriguing part of this deep dive, the small print, the technical terms, selah, miktam, gittith. The source admits that even the guys translating the Old Testament into Greek in the 3rd century BC, the Septuagint, they were guessing at what these meant.
It adds to the mystery. We're dealing with musical terminology from 3,000 years ago. It's like someone finding a sheet of music in the year 5000 that says distorted guitar solo and trying to figure out what religious ritual that refers to.
So let's decode a few of these. Mizmôr. We see that everywhere.
That's the technical word for a song with instrumental accompaniment. It implies structure. These weren't chanted a cappella in a cave. There were strings, percussion, flutes. It was a production.
Okay, then there's mashil.
Mashil comes from a root meaning to make wise or skillful. The source notes that psalms with this title, like Psalm 32 or 78, are usually didactic. They are teaching songs, and often they teach through the lens of a chastening experience.
So a mashil is a song that says, I went through something hard, and here is the wisdom I gained from it.
Yes, it's wisdom literature set to music.
Now, miktam. This one blew my mind. The source connects it to an Akkadian word, katamu.
Which means to cover.
Right. Now, in theology, when we hear cover, we immediately think of atonement, covering sin.
We do, but the source argues against that here. In this context, it's not about covering sin, it's about being covered. Protection. It's a plea for defense.
Wow.
The source uses a very modern analogy. It calls a miktam an SOS.
That changes how you read Psalm 16 or Psalm 56, a miktam of David. It's not just a poem. It's David tapping out an SOS signal because he's in danger.
It brings the urgency right to the surface.
What about the most famous one? Selah. It's in there 71 times.
And we still debate it. But the root implies lifting up.
Lifting up what?
Most likely the sound. It's a musical direction. It probably signals an instrumental interlude where the choir stops and the orchestra lifts up the volume a crescendo. It's a pause for the mind, but an explosion for the ears.
And finally, the two names. I love these because they just give us the flavor of the culture. You have a psalm set to the tune of the Hind of the Dawn.
Which is Song 22, a big one.
Or the doves on far-off terebinths.
Psalm 56.
And then do not destroy.
That one is fascinating. The source links it to Isaiah 65.8 regarding the new wine in the cluster. The theory is that Do Not Destroy was a popular vintage song, a song the grape treaders sang during the harvest.
So David takes a folk song, a work song that everybody knows, and he sets a heavy theological prayer to that melody.
It shows that their worship wasn't cordoned off from their daily life. They brought the vineyard right into the sanctuary.
We have to shift gears now to the academic battlefield. The source brings up two German giants, Hermann Gunkel and Sigmund Mowinckel. Now, normally I might say we skip the German scholars, but the source insists their influence is unavoidable.
You really can't understand modern psalm study without Gunkel. He changed the question. Before him, everyone asked, who wrote this? Gunkel asked, how is this used?
This is the Sitz in Leben.
The setting in life. Gunkel developed the system of Gonigen, or classes. He grouped them. Hymns, community laments, royal psalms. And honestly, this is helpful.
In what way?
Well, if you know a psalm is a community lament, you understand why it switches between singular and plural pronouns. It helps you track the flow.
But then Mowinckel came along and maybe took it too far.
Mowinckel is associated with the cultic approach. He became obsessed with the idea of a New Year festival. He believed Israel had this massive festival, just like the Babylonians, where they celebrated Yahweh becoming king or ascending the throne.
And he tried to force dozens of psalms into this hypothetical festival liturgy.
Right. And the source pushes back hard on this. It says, sure, the psalms were used in worship, the cultus, but if you push Mowinckel's theory too far, you strip the psalms of their historical reality.
This is the danger. You end up saying Psalm 51 is not really David crying over his sin with Bathsheba.
Right.
You say, oh no, this is just a generic confession form that a priest would read during the New Year festival.
And that just sterilizes the Bible. It turns real blood and guts history into mere ritual. As Reformed thinkers, we have to agree with the source's critique. We have to balance Gunkel's insights on form with the scriptural titles.
The source uses Peter's sermon in Acts 2 to nail this down.
Yes, Peter quotes David, but he says David spoke as a prophet. David was not just reciting a liturgy for a festival. He was, as the source says, foreseeing things beyond his own horizon.
He was seeing the resurrection of Christ.
Exactly. If we reduce the Psalms to just generic ritual texts, we lose that prophetic edge completely.
So we keep the history. Now let's get to the theology. The source outlines the doctrine of God in the Psalter.
It's majestic. God is creator, ruler of history. But specifically, he is the God of the covenant. the God of Abraham and Moses.
But we have to address the elephant in the room,
Well,
the imprecatory psalms, the curses.
the problem of the curses.
I think every Christian has had this moment. You're reading a psalm, it's beautiful, and then suddenly the writer says, I hate them with a perfect hatred, or, blessed is he who dashes your little ones against the rocks, and you freeze.
It is jarring, no question.
How does the source explain this? Because love your enemies is our command.
The source offers a three-part explanation that I found incredibly helpful. First, it's about zeal. These curses are not petty personal vendettas. The psalmist is aligning himself with God's cause. He's saying, God, I love what you love, so I must hate what you hate.
So it's a plea for justice, not just personal revenge.
Right. Second, there's a historical limitation. They lived under the law. They did not have the full revelation of grace that comes with the cross.
And the third point.
This is the one that really stopped me in my tracks. The source states that the Psalter has no assured belief in a future life or resurrection.
That sounds almost heretical to say.
It does, but look at the text. There are flashes of hope, Psalm 16, Psalm 73, where they expect to be with God. But they didn't have a settled doctrine of heaven and hell yet. That revelation was progressive.
So if you don't have a guarantee that the bad guy is going to face judgment day after he dies,
then he has to face judgment now.
If justice doesn't happen in this life, it might not happen at all.
Precisely. That explains the desperation. That explains the violence of the prayer. They are screaming, God, if you are just, you have to destroy this wickedness right here because this is the only stage I know of.
And they couldn't distinguish the sinner from the sin.
Yeah.
To destroy the wickedness meant destroying the wicked man.
That's right. Now, we, standing on the other side of the New Testament, we know about the final judgment. We know about the possibility of redemption for the worst sinner, so we don't pray those curses. But, and here's the challenge, the source reminds us that these psalms testify to the reality of moral judgment. They remind us that God does hate sin. We can't get so grace-focused that we become indifferent to evil.
That is a heavy balance to strike. And that leads us to the Messiah. Because if their view of the afterlife was a bit dim, their hope for a Messiah was burning bright.
It was the focus. And the Psalter gives us two very different portraits of this Messiah. And for centuries, no one could figure out how they fit together.
What are the two portraits?
First, you have the reigning king, Psalm 2, Psalm 110, the son of David who crushes the nations with a rod of iron. He's victorious, powerful, political.
And the second?
The suffering servant. The priest king who is abandoned. Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 69, he's mocked, beaten, rejected.
You can see why the Jewish scholars were confused. Is he a conqueror or a victim?
They seemed irreconcilable until Christ. The source points us to Luke 24. After the resurrection, Jesus walks with the disciples to Emmaus, and what does he do?
He opens the scriptures.
He opens the Psalms. He shows them that the Christ had to suffer first and then enter his glory.
He's the key that unlocks the whole library.
He is. Without Jesus, the Psalms are a book of contradictions. With Jesus, they are a coherent prophecy.
This brings us to our final section, the Christian and the Psalter. The source makes a beautiful point that I think we often overlook. This was not just a book about Jesus, it was the book Jesus used.
It was his prayer book. Think about the humanity of that for a moment. Jesus learned to read with these texts. He memorized them in the synagogue. When he was in the wilderness, fighting Satan, he used scripture. When he celebrated the Last Supper, they sang the Hallel, Psalms 113 through 118.
And on the cross.
On the cross. In his moment of greatest agony, he didn't improvise. He went to the text that had formed him. Into your hands I commit my spirit. He died with the Psalms on his lips.
That changes everything. If it was good enough for the master, it must be essential for the disciple.
That's why the church has always claimed the Psalter. The source mentions Martin Luther's famous description. He called the Psalter a Bible in miniature.
It really is the whole story creation, fall, redemption, glory packed into 150 songs.
And as the source concludes, even though it originated in the Jewish church, it is illuminated by the gospel. It is fully the property of the Christian church for worship and adoration.
We have covered a lot of ground today. We've gone from the ancient clay tablets of Ugarit to the SOS signals of David, through the arguments of German scholars, all the way to the theology of the cross.
It's an incredible continuity. It shows us that our faith is not a novelty. We're not making this up as we go. When we sing the Psalms, we're joining a choir that has been singing for 3,000 years.
I want to leave you with a thought that's been nagging at me since we discussed the imprecatory Psalms.
Okay.
We said that the psalmists prayed for immediate, sometimes violent justice because they didn't have a clear guarantee of the future judgment. They were desperate for God to act now.
They had a holy impatience.
So here's the question for you listening today. Does our better theology make us lazy? We know there's a final judgment. We know God will settle the score in the end. Does that knowledge make us more patient with injustice than the psalmists were? Or does it just make us indifferent?
That is a haunting question.
Do we have that same burning zeal for righteousness in the here and now? Or do we just kind of shrug and say, well, God will sort it out later? The psalmist would not let God off the hook that easily. Maybe we shouldn't either.
Something to think about.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the Psalms. I hope you open your Bible and see those ancient songs in a completely new light.
Keep reading.
We'll see you next time on Reformed Thinking.